Brett's done a really nice job of helping to really vet some of the resources that are coming in. I've been on the Open Syed. We already currently use gizmos in the middle school, so that's already been vetted. I sent the Open Syed out to the building principals for elementary, middle school. It's not really anything for the high school, at least at this point. So they are also taking a look at that and seeing how they can support their staff with that. And then developing the common assessment. So, you know, as Mr. Powell said, a lot of this is time, and Mr. Moran's done a nice job too of trying to get the teachers some time to work on some of these unit planning. And they have to develop all new assessments. So, you know, the standards are new, the assessment has to be new. The way of teaching is new, the way of assessing is going to have to be new. They are going to start releasing some items, but when I had the opportunity to speak with the gentleman from PDE, you're not going to believe this when I say it, but the test isn't even fully developed yet. And it's going to be given in the spring, so that's back here.
Like 3 months, 2 months spring.
Yeah, yeah. No, he says
not 2026 spring.
no, like spring 2025.
Oh my goodness.
He said they're going to be ready, and I trust that they will be. But they were still working on some of those because it's even. Usually when a test comes out, we'll get released items. So after they take the PSSA in the spring, they will release items so that our teachers can see some of those and they can see how the questions are structured, they can see what kind of things the kids are being asked, they can see how the constructive response scenarios are written up so that they can help guide and teach the students how to attack a constructive response. So they will release those, and that's why this is a pilot year for 5th and 8th, you know, but unfortunately then going to Mr. Polishuk and Ms. Burton, they will not have that same grace or consideration to have those release items ahead of time. So that's just something for you to think about as we move through this process. Something that PDE did develop is something called Firefly. So some of you that have been probably remembers this from high school too. They take CDTs, which is a diagnostic test, which lets our teachers know like where the gaps in learning are. So if they take an algebra CDT at the beginning of the year, the algebra teachers can look and go, okay, we really need to do some work on linear equation. Okay, so it tells them where some of those gaps are for instructional planning. Firefly is a benchmark. So grades 5 and 8 will take these next year. And it will help the teachers know how much of the science the kids already know. And it'll help predict where they should be by the end of the school year in their science learning. So that's something new that the state put out, and we thought we were going to get to implement it this year, you know, since the science standards are out there, but they won't have it ready for science until next year. So that will be something that 5th and 8th grade will do to help the teachers plan for instruction and see where their kids' strengths and weaknesses are. We talked about the pilot PSSA in the spring, and then the new, you know, the full-on PSSA next year, which will count, and then the Keystone next spring. So I hope that fits 2020. Yep. Perfect. Any questions?
Just one. So for parents who opt out of the PSSAs, or like this new test that hasn't been released yet, what they have to do is come into the school, they have to look over the test, sign a waiver that says you won't share that with anybody. How is that going to happen now, like this year? For parents who don't want their children dating?
Well, they'll have that ready.
Okay.
They have to, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they have to have the parent opt out.
Okay.
Right? Yes. Yes. Well, if we can't show you a test, we can't show a kid a test.
Right. Well,
so.
right. Yeah. Right. You can't sign off on anything. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That was a good question. Yeah, they'll have that ready. That is part of chapter 4 for parents to opt out, so they legally have to have that.
Okay.
It's awful hard for the teacher to prepare students for tests.
Yeah, but I'm talking to, so I've been in close contact with Dr. Becker. When his scheduling numbers come out, February, March, and we took a look at it again today. It was already on our calendar and it just really dive into it, spend some time on it today. So taking a look at what that could look like next year for Mr. Powell to continue that support 3 through 8. Even if that means some release time for Ms. Burton and Mr. Polishuk to be working on, their new curriculum. So been in some contact with him, like what that can look like next year. Because this is not a one-year implementation. This is going to take some time to get all these units in and all the common assessments and get our teachers where they need to be able to get our kids where they need to be.
I think until they really take the test, we won't know for sure exactly what things must look like. So we can predict and try, and then when it happens, we'll know more.
The one thing is we talked about too is if Firefly develops the biology, we will be able to get high school kids onto that as well, because then we'll be able to see how the questions are structured and what kind of questions they're asking. So that would help them in their planning and their instructional practices as well.
This isn't gonna affect our staff or our teachers, because I know with PSSAs, it's the students' grades are like what the teacher taught to reflect on how well the students are doing in the class and how well the teachers are teaching the students. So, like, is that going to make a difference with this?
So for 5th grade and 8th grade, so it's a 3-year composite, but since it's a pilot this year and the scores don't technically count,
Okay.
5th grade science and 8th grade science will not have that score attributed to them.
Okay, that's a good thing.
But it could impact
this.
Mr. Polishuk and Ms. Burton because they don't get that year of grace. It's,
I don't think so. I don't think it's fair at all.
I
mean, you have to do it, but.
I don't either, which is also why I talked to PE, and I will continue those conversations. He was very open to having the conversation.
Yeah.
And passing along information, to continue to have those conversations about how is it that we can have kind of a grace year, a pilot for 5th through 8th, but we don't have the same consideration for our high school teachers.
Yeah.
And that's a graduation.
Well, right.
And it's a graduation.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yes, so definitely some inconsistency in, I'm just gonna say, I don't know this to be true, but to me, it appears like an inconsistency in the thought process
Yeah.
and what they were planning. So
Yeah.
I'm sure they had many conversations about it and have a reason for why they did it. I'm not sure. Right.
Grade 6 through 8, it's kind of interesting. The 8th grade PSSA will assess all the standards from grade 6 through 8. But we're not implementing, we can't implement the new curriculum right away. So that's another.
Yes, that's a good point.
Because they're still being tested on the whole.
Right.
I love it.
Definitely.
Wow. Well, I hope that they pressure from obviously administration, the board,
I think we've been
it's not
trying
your fault.
to have, and we will share that with them, so thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Like, we will share that with them, but we have been trying to put the supports in where we can and keep it urgent but low level so that they're not overwhelmed with it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Dr. Brandon or Mr. Powell? Thank you all very much for
Yeah,
your
thank you.
presentation and attending the conference.
Yeah.
And if you guys don't mind, unless you have questions for Mr. Powell, I told him he didn't have to stay for the policy part.
You're
now.
As long as you guys are okay with that.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.
Appreciate it. Okay, policies. We're going to start with policy 205, which is postgraduate students. And honestly, this policy doesn't change at all. It is just in the PSBA format. So our current policy has the purpose and the exact same thing is written, but it's listed as authority under the PSBA. It is the exact same policy. Are there any The next policy, assignment within the district. This was also the exact same policy. The only thing that I want to draw your attention to is under the paragraph where it says the superintendent or designee shall assign incoming transfer students. So at the bottom of the first page, if you flip that over, the first paragraph on the back side of the page, there is a new statement that we added that PSBA didn't have because of some inconsistencies of requests within the district. So the recommendation is, and this is for the board to consider, that there is no guarantee that a request for the assignment of a student to a specific room or staff member will be honored. Our current policy says that no requests are accepted. But as we were working through this policy, we know that in practice that is not always necessarily the case. So we wanted to make the policy reflect the practices that are happening within the district. So that would be something for you guys to consider, that we would add that statement in there that says a parent can make a request, but there's no guarantee that that request is going to be honored.
It's pretty soft.
It's softer, yes.
Yeah.
So that was updated, and on it, that is really the only change to that policy, is that we would put that softer wording in there that allows the principal to at least consider honoring a request. Any questions on that policy? Policy 207 is the confidential communication of students. This is also the same policy as we currently have. The only change here is where it says in qualifying circumstances, the current Littlestown policy only has a building principal. This policy update would expand it to include the superintendent or designated administrator, that the confidential information can be shared with. Okay. Any questions on?
So that was just, so there's more towards communication within the whole administration.
So if a teacher needed to share something and maybe the building principal is not available, or even thinking chain of command, if they needed to come to me or to Dr. Mitchell, we would be covered under the policy by expanding who they could share that information with. And it really just protects the confidentiality. Any questions on that? Policy 208, withdrawal from school. There were 0 changes still. It is just an update in PSBA format, a PSBA language, but there were no changes. I mean, there wasn't even really any language changes. Sometimes I feel bad because I'm not really bringing in policies that need change. They're just now in PSBA format with some PSBA language. So if you get tired of hearing me say that, for sure.
I know that, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Policy 807 is opening exercises. Now, the change in that is that a new law was passed in Pennsylvania in June of 2024 that states that we have to have a moment of silence on September 11th. So that is now included in this policy. Something that you can take a look at as far as board decision, where the board may direct professional employees to conduct a brief period of silence, or the board shall direct the professional employees to conduct a brief moment of silence. Currently, our policy says may, so that's how I kept it in the PSBA language. And Nick and I talked about that. Currently, they do a moment of silence. I know at the high school and I see middle school. I'm not sure about that.
Now, is there like a school on the weekend, on the weekend, it's only
It would only be if it's on a weekday, but I can tell you our practice has been to honor it either that Friday or Monday then. Yeah, we always honor it. We always read a statement over the announcement. When I was at the high school, I personally read it instead of having a student read it, and then did the moment of silence after the statement,
Yeah,
to separate it out from the pledge.
okay, that's good.
Any questions on that policy? Policy 810, now there is some change to this and I want to explain why. In current Littlestown policy, I don't know why we did this, I don't have the history on it, so forgive me for that. But in our current policy, it goes into employee information about, making sure that they're responsible for the kids on the bus, that they are, they have all their clearances, that they haven't been convicted of crimes and stuff. That doesn't really belong in this policy, because that's already covered in the 300s in our employee policy. I'm not sure why it was included in the, PSBA pulls that language out. Like, we would not be talking about employee clearances or anything. So
Since it's already covered in another place.
it's covered in other policy. But that's something that the board would have to give direction on. If you want to keep it in there, we would put it back, we would include it in the PSBA policy, but it has some redundancy, or it is redundant, because when you're talking about employees and how they're, I don't want to say held accountable, but the policies that are beholden to them are in the 300s. So it really doesn't belong in this policy. It's about transportation. It's not about the employee clearances and stuff. That is covered in
So you
300.
just strike it out, or you just remove it?
My recommendation is to you is to consider removing it. So
Yeah.
but that's a committee. I do want to draw your attention to the back part of page 1. There are 2 new areas, and this is also under law, just that we have to provide transportation to students in foster care and students who are experiencing homelessness. So we do have to provide transportation for them. So there are 2 statements that are in there. So those are the changes for the transportation. Questions on that? The next one is policy 815. And there are some changes in here. And again, this is no finger pointing or anything of that nature. There's just some differences in here where in our policy, for example, when you take a look at Littlestown's policy, we have electronic device as one of our definitions, and then the definition is like this long, because they tried to list everything conceivable that they could think of that would be an electronic device. If you look at PSBA's policy, the definition is it's very concise, but it still covers everything it needs to. So that's the big difference in this policy, is just the conciseness of their definitions versus LASD's definitions. If you go to, under authority, there are 7 areas. We selected all 7. And then we also added number 8, which they left blank that we could add something. So the recommendation to this committee to consider is including depictions or descriptions of school violence as part of an acceptable use for this policy. So you would have to let me know if you want that to be included.
Yes.
For obvious reasons.
Yes. If anybody, a question that you may be asking yourselves, or when you go through this a couple more times, under delegation of responsibilities, we do not have it checked for tracking systems. While we can locate through some of our IP stuff, we don't technically, in the truest sense, track our devices. So that cannot be checked. And then under district website, which is under security, copyright, district website, we selected shall, the district shall, and then it goes on to establish and maintain a website, and shall develop and modify. So we chose shall instead of may for that. But that is really a committee decision. Shall. Okay.
It's a good way of saying it, but it's less than direct.
Well, shall is more direct.
We're gonna do it.
But I got what you're saying. Accessibility on the very, toward the very end of the policy, now that section is new, and that is really some